Alright, talk about safety. I think safety class number one has to do with what I consider probably one of the, if not the biggest safety risk problem with throwing knives. It's a potentially deadly. It's a lot of knife hits with quite a bit of power. And that would be bounce backs. What is a bounce back, right? It's pretty obvious. If you've thrown any knives, you've had knives bounce back at you from the target. Yeah, what is a bounce back? We all know what bounce backs are. Bounce backs are something to be aware of and be prepared to move. Things to consider also when you're throwing knives is the potential for a bounce back to come back and hit you or somebody, a bystander, or even an animal, a dog or a cat, or in my case, I've had bounce backs break my favorite beer mug. I've had a bounce back. No, that wasn't a bounce back. I had a knife, intoxicated person throw a knife through my guitar a long time ago, but that wasn't a bounce back. That's another safety class, is intoxication. But right now, the intoxication for anybody around you, honestly, I'll get into that when I get to that class. It's just things to be aware of. That's the only reason I'm bringing these up. There's really not much to some of these, but things you need to be aware of if you're going to be practicing a lot and practicing effectively and safely. I made a little clip to show you how hard a thrown knife hits. And, you know, what have you got really to go on? You know, the movies, they don't really, you know, but here's a clip that shows how hard a thrown knife hits. Now this is me putting my 230-pound carcass weight and arm into stabbing a target. Overhand Comanche style, as I call it, versus me throwing a knife. And a thrown knife hits just as hard, maybe harder. And here's that clip. Stab versus thrown. All right, stab first. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to throw this other large buoy. I don't know if you could see, but they're about even how much the force that these sunk. All right, pretty well even. And I've done this before, and they usually come out even. So you see that there is a lot of energy in that knife. And if you throw and you hit the target and it doesn't stick, the target doesn't absorb the energy, it's going to come back. The knife's going to come back. It's got to go somewhere. And if the knife and the target aren't going to absorb the shock, then it's going to come back at you. It's going to spend it in traveling. I'll tell you a couple of stories why this is real. I knew a couple of people injured gravely from bounce backs, throwing knives. One was in high school and the other was in the military. And the high school one, I had a friend, Tom, who was blind. And Tom was part of my social circle, or I should say I was part of his. We hung out. He was part of my group of friends. And Tom was blind, you know. He always had his eyes, he was blind. So I asked Tom one day how he lost his sight. And he told me that he had been born blind in one eye, and he was throwing knives once, and a knife bounced back and hit his other good eye and put that out, putting him in eternal darkness for the rest of his days on earth. I have no reason to believe he would make that up. I'm like, wow, really? Yep, that's what happened. Sometimes bad luck happens. The guy had one good eye, you know, and you need both eyes for depth perception. So just having one eye probably put him at quite a knife throwing disadvantage, because you can't really tell depth accurately with one eye. So I've read. Other things come into factor too with that, with depth perception, which is very important in knife throwing. Well, so he had his other eye put out throwing knives. Now go forward to my military years, and we weren't officially, I was in the 82nd Airborne, an infantry squad leader. And you know, we had knives and guns and pistols and all the stuff infantrymen carry out to the woods with them. And when we had time when we weren't doing anything, which was quite often, some of us would throw knives, you know, for sport, practice. We weren't supposed to, but we did anyway. Well, there was a guy in my company, that would be Charlie Company, 2nd 504th. He was throwing knives, and I wasn't there, I did not see this, but some of my guys in my platoon told me what happened. He was throwing knives at trees, and he missed, and one bounced back, and it didn't hit him, it hit a guy next to him that wasn't even paying attention to what was going on. Hit the guy pretty much in his butt cheek, excuse me, upper thigh, and stuck in, went through his uniform, no problem, and buried deep. Probably hit a bone. It's the only thing that's going to stop a throwing knife is bone, or the hilt. You know, the knives, they hit hard, and they'll come back hard too. And he had to be medevaced out. It was quite a bloody mess. I mean, we were all kind of laughing because it hit him in the butt cheek, but actually he got injured pretty badly. He had to get taken out of the field and sewn up. And you better believe our chain of command was pretty mad that we were throwing knives and somebody got injured. So they doubled down, no knife throwing in the field. That meant that Sergeant Shank, yours truly, had to be more discreet throwing knives while I was in that company. I was in other infantry companies, they didn't mind at all. Another bounce back actually happened to somebody that read my book. I wrote a book, Sergeant Shank's book on knife throwing, and it's been out there since I think 2010. Well, I had a guy get hold of me that read my book and told me that he was practicing knife throwing. He built a target like I recommended in my book, and he hit the target and it bounced back and cut his son's foot open. His son was standing next to him, and cut his foot open pretty badly, where he had to take him to the hospital to get stitched up. So those are 3 cases of bounce backs. One put a man's eye out, one hit a guy in the rump and went through his uniform and through his flesh like nothing. And another guy cut his son's foot open. One of these guys was hit, was the one throwing a knife. 2 of these people injured in these 3 stories weren't even throwing the knives. They were just standing around the person throwing a knife and they got hit. So be aware when you throw a knife, that not just for your safety, but people around you need to be aware of what you're doing and well out of the way. If you're throwing at night, which you shouldn't be throwing at night, honestly, it's too dangerous, but if it's limited visibility, you'll also know a bounce back by the sound. As soon as it hits the target, you're going to either hear a nice solid gratifying thunk of the knife bearing into the target, or you're going to hear splang. There's a difference. Here's a couple of examples of thunk versus splang. You will not only see the miss and the bounce back, but the moment your knife impacts the target, however, you will hear the difference between, you know, a solid hit and a miss, which is going to sound a lot different. I shall demonstrate some hits and misses, and I've got to force myself to miss. For you, for this course, I will miss. Oh, I hit the handle of the knife. Yeah, alright, well, that'll happen. I guess that's worth talking about. You can see where I threw. Pretty much I've thrown like my shot group is the same. In fact, my second throw was good, but it hit the knife. And when you're throwing multiple knives, that's going to happen. As you stand in the same place throwing, and they're going to pretty much go in the same area, just like this one did. So I hit the knife, and that was a bounce back. That's a reason for a bounce back when you're throwing multiple knives at the same target. Or a hatchet, whatever you're throwing. It could hit whatever you threw before, and that will cause it to miss and bounce back. Alright, so that's what solid hits sound like. Let's see if I can force myself to miss. That wasn't easy, but I did it. Ooh, that one almost got me. You get the point. You get the point on that. I've had some close calls. You know, I've moved out of the way quick enough. Sometimes you can throw a knife and it could hit perfect, dead on point first, and it doesn't stick for whatever reason. Hit a nail. Often it'll hit another knife. If you're throwing multiple knives, like you're throwing 3 or 4 knives at the same target, you're apt to throw at the same place. You're going to have a high probability that you're going to hit your knife that you threw prior to that, and you're going to damage the knife, and the knife isn't going to stick. It's going to bounce back. It's going to go somewhere. It's going to fly off, maybe at you, maybe not. So you could do a good throw and have a bounce back. You know, I've thrown at oak trees, hard trees. I mean, depending upon the knife, it just wouldn't stick. So be prepared for bounce backs. They're probably your #1 risk factor when practicing throwing knives. Be careful for your own safety. Be careful for other people around you. Be careful for pets, animals. Be careful for property. And finally, be careful for your knife. You don't want to break it. So you can mitigate bounce backs by the type of target you're throwing at as well. More onto that when targets. But if you have a target that's solid, like I keep thinking of like 3/4 inch plywood, big flat board, immovable target, you're going to have a higher risk for a bounce back. As if you have a softer target, a pine wood, or like the target I throw at, which is a giant cross section of a tree suspended on a rope, that's going to give when the knife hits it. So it's not going to, if I miss, which doesn't happen too often, but if I do even a good throw, if it gives, it's going to absorb some of that energy as opposed to sending it all back at me. So be aware of bounce backs and be ready to move out of the way, and make sure people around you either aren't around you when you're throwing knives or they're aware of the danger. Okay, that's all I have to say on bounce backs. Be aware. Dismissed.